from the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Playgrounds are a huge part of childhood, and today I want to make a confession to you all. I have diagnosed myself with playground anxiety. I'm so worried about injuries, it's hard for me to fully enjoy playgrounds. It has gotten a bit easier as my little guy has gotten older, but it hasn't fully gone away. Now, hopefully, you guys don't suffer from full-blown playground anxiety like I do, but if you've ever worried about keeping your kiddos safe without spoiling their fun, this episode is for you.
A lot of parents think, oh, my child is so small and they're new to the playground and I want to be really safe with them, so I'll go down the slide with them. And you think you're being safe, but if you go down the slide with a child, very often, this is very common, that the child's little feet and their little tennis shoes, that rubber or gummy material on the bottom of their shoes will catch the side of the slide and it breaks their leg. Ugh. It's a horrible thing to have happen because you're trying to be so safe and you don't realize that the safest way for your child to go down is by themselves.
Welcome to Healthy Children, the podcast for parents from the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho Sanchez. I am a pediatrician and a mama figuring it out. This is a judgment-free space where all questions are good questions, and the answers will hopefully be even better. Let's get started. Today we're talking all about playgrounds, and to do so, we have with us Dr. Julie Gilchrist, who is a pediatrician and a researcher. Julie, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Julie, let's start at the beginning. As I mentioned, it is hard for me to relax at playgrounds because I do still worry a lot about injuries, and my son is almost 4 now. So for perspective here, how common are playground injuries?
Well, kids fall down all the time. At home, on the playground, everywhere. There's going to be bumps and bruises and the scraped knees and all that, so that's going to happen. But when you look at the injuries that take kids to the emergency department, somewhere around 200,000 kids under 18 are seen in emergency departments every year for playground-related injuries. Most are not terribly significant. There could be some broken bones, but the ones we're really trying to prevent are things like brain injuries. So some of the more severe, and unfortunately they do happen, but there are things that parents can think about and people who design and maintain playgrounds can think about to help prevent those injuries.
And I want to ask you all about that. I wanted to ask before we go there, give us a sense of what are the most common injuries that happen. You talked about scrapes and, kids fall down. What are some of the most common other things that you see happen?
Well, the common things are the little cuts and scrapes and bruises. And then, unfortunately, there's the twisted ankle from landing wrong or the broken bone from landing on an outstretched arm. But the things that are really severe that we really want to prevent, strangulation, when things catch, like drawstrings on hoods or leashes or necklaces or things that kids are wearing that can catch in little open areas in the equipment. And then severe brain injuries, of course, when you fall and hit something hard. Those are the ones that are more severe. Now, luckily, those are not nearly as common, but they do happen, unfortunately.
Yeah. So let's talk prevention, Julie, because hopefully with a few measures in place, we can reduce the risks and try to relax a little bit. What makes a playground, in your expert opinion, quote unquote, safe from a structural or design perspective? And what I'm wondering is specifically, are there standards that parents and pediatricians should be aware of?
Well, there certainly are standards. And the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission has put out a wonderful book of standards. And it's actually quite readable if somebody's really interested in playground safety. And it is called CPSC's Public Playground Safety Handbook. So you can just Google it and it comes up. It's been revised many times. I think the most current one is 2015, if I'm correct in how far I was able to look. But it is down to the details of what to look for and how things should be designed and how far apart equipment should be, how high equipment should be, what should be under it. All the nitty-gritty of safety and playground design is in there. Unfortunately, the safest playground is also the one kids won't play on because it's not fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So there is a balance. We have to figure out how to give kids that sense of challenge and exhilaration and fun and thrilling riding and running and swinging and spinning and all the fun things that help kids in their development. But of course, the more fun they are and the more challenging they are, the more likely that the kids are also going to not complete it the way it was intended and fall or bump into something or, get injured in some way. So there's a balance. Understand that your child using the equipment properly may still not be able to complete a challenge, a task, and fall. But hopefully, with good design, the significant injuries can be really minimized.
Yeah, I love that. And I truthfully didn't know that there was a whole handbook on the standards for playgrounds. And hopefully it is something that our community leaders are reading, right, as playgrounds are designed. But I imagine those things are updated as we learn more. So definitely something that we may want to take a look at and stay up to date on.
We do want to think in design. So the things parents can look for are, we want to have shade. And so trees are great, but having a tree in an area where kids are going to be running or exiting a slide or swinging or jumping out of a swing, which you don't encourage kids to do, but they do anyway. Things like that. You want to have a good, safe distance between any fixed object like a pole or a tree or something like that and a place where kids are moving through the playground, exiting a slide, having swings that are swinging and things like that. So there are distances that are important, heights of equipment versus distance to different things. You want kids running on the playground, so there should be active areas, but you don't want active areas to be where you're kind of coming out of a slide or where they're swinging, because you don't want a kid who's swinging running into and colliding with a kid who's running. And so thinking about where the equipment is and how it's oriented on the space and how kids are going to be using it and running through it so that there's a flow that keeps kids from colliding with each other is really, really important. So there's a whole lot that goes into playground safety, long before a parent ever steps onto the playground.
Yeah, and it's, again, so good to know. Now, I do want to ask you specifically about slides. Some slides get insanely hot, especially in the summer and early fall, right? And I have noticed that some slides have rails at the top, some slides don't. So what's sort of the standard for slides themselves?
Well, different heights are allowed, but the higher you go, the more dangerous it is. There are certain requirements for if it's an open slide, like not in a tube, how high the sides have to be. I can't recall exactly, but I think it's like 4 inches or so. So the kid actually stays in the slide. They want to have something like a hood or a bar that makes the person who's going to ride the slide actually sit down before they start to slide, where you can't run down the slide because that's not safe. So you want to actually have your tuchus on the slide when you go down. And so they'll do that with a bar or a hood or a little small tunnel or something like that. You want to have a flat area where the slide levels off so that you kind of slow down before you actually get to the end and are exiting the slide. Materials are really important too, because even plastic, when it's in the sun, can get quite hot. And so again, having shade from buildings or trees or a cover of some sort, but obviously the more trees and, poles to keep the cover up or a building, again, the distances where they are in relation to the playground is really important. I think they suggest 6 feet between equipment and stationary poles and objects and things. With slides and swings too, I think it's the distance. The swing is high, should be cleared in front as well. You have to check these standards again because my memory may not be perfect. The other thing to think about with kids running, we want them running and having fun on the playground, but you have to think about traffic.
Of course. Yeah.
And so if there's a street nearby or someplace where there's going to be a bike path or something like that, then you do want to have some sort of barrier, a fence, or something that keeps the kids from running, when they're playing chase, keep them corralled into a safe area where they're not going to encounter any traffic.
Yeah. That's a big one here in New York City, as you can imagine, right? Like all of our kids are very enclosed in these playgrounds because, again, there's so much traffic, right? And
Absolutely.
I love it. I know he's not going anywhere. Now, tell us, Julie, about the proper way to slide down a slide.
Wow. Yeah. So you wouldn't think about it, but yeah, a lot of parents think, oh, my child is so small and they're new to the playground and I want to be really safe with them. So I'll go down the slide with them. And you think you're being safe, but if you go down the slide with a child, very often, this is very common, that the child's little feet and their little tennis shoes, that rubber or gummy material on the bottom of their shoes will catch the side of the slide and it breaks their leg.
Ugh.
It's a horrible thing to have happen because you're trying to be so safe and you don't realize that the safest way for your child to go down is by themselves on their own, on their bottom, feet first, sitting up, or, if they're little, even laying down, as long as their feet first, is the safest way for a child to slide. As an adult or even an older child, you do not want them going down tandem because the momentum from two bodies is too much force and can break their little legs if their feet or the shoes touch the sides. And so you definitely want to have kids that slide on their own. You want to make sure that they let the person who slid before them, like in front of a diving board, same thing. You want to make sure that they cleared the area before they're coming down so that they're not piling up at the bottom and somebody getting hurt through a collision.
Yeah, definitely don't want that. And, it's funny. I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm remembering the day my child handed me his glasses before going down a slide, Julie. And I was like, wow, he's so careful. He's handing me his glasses before he goes down a slide. No, it's because he was about to dive head first down a slide. Yes, we had to have a conversation about that. But yes, he did do that. He was thankfully okay, but kids really do make up all kinds of things. So trying to establish how we do this from the beginning, I think is really helpful.
And interestingly, when you think about things you should or shouldn't wear, a lot of kids don't think about taking their bike helmet off. If they ride their bike to the playground and they've got their bike helmet on, a lot of kids will get on the playground with their bike helmet, and that's actually not safe. It's a catch point. Yes. And so you want to have them take their bike helmet off before they play on the equipment.
Fascinating. I think we usually take our helmet off, but I will make a point of taking our helmet off now that you've said that. I love that. So the other thing I wanted to ask you, Julie, talk to us about surfacing, because I feel better when a playground has sand or rubber mats, but I wonder if it actually affects injury risks in any way. Do you know, is there data around this?
There is a lot of data. Surfacing is one of the most studied things in playground safety. And there is so much information. And it's challenging too, because there's a risk benefit. So the first thing is you want to make sure that there's a shock absorbing surface. So dirt, grass, concrete, asphalt, none of those are shock absorbing. Even though the grass feels really good to your feet, it is not a shock absorbing surface. It's one of the most important things since most injuries occur from falls. So you want to have a really good shock absorbing surface so that if you fall or when they fall, that they're less likely to get injured. So when you think about surfacing, the most important thing is in the places where they're likely to fall or where they're moving through, that it's the right thickness. So unfortunately, as you go down slides and as you come off swings, you know how kids will sweep their feet under the swings and all of that sand or pea gravel or wood mulch or whatever that shock absorbing surface is that's on there oftentimes gets dispersed. So one of the most important things for playground maintenance is to make sure that in those areas that are high traffic areas where things get moved, that it gets moved back so that there's frequent raking, or, whatever's necessary to put that back to the necessary depth for shock absorbing. And that's well documented. It's all in that handbook. Public Playground Safety Handbook lists, if it's this surface, the depth that it needs to be considered shock absorbing. And there's pros and cons with different things. Sand, it's great, but it's wet and it's got to replace it. Same thing with pea gravel. Mulch breaks down. There's problems with like cats and dogs in the neighborhoods with some of the natural things. There's concerns sometimes with the rubber, like the old tire mulch that they use. Some people have concerns over some of the materials that are used in there. Love the solid surface ones because those are ADA compliant where it's accessible to everybody. But unfortunately, they're not as shock absorbing as some of the deep free type things like pea gravel and mulch and sand if they're at the right depth. So it really depends on where you are, what the equipment that you have is. The taller the equipment, the deeper you need that shock absorbing surface to be. So the taller the equipment, the less likely that pour in place gummy mats or whatever is going to be good enough. Gotta love that because it doesn't have to be raked and replaced and all the things that are problematic with the other stuff that can move. But unfortunately, it's not the greatest as the equipment gets taller and higher. It's very expensive to put in, but once you put it in once, if it's maintained well, then that's it. So the costs are minimal going forward, unlike sand or gravel or mulch that, it's less expensive to put in, but you're going to be replacing it multiple times a year.
Yeah. You're blowing my mind, Julie. I just didn't realize there was so much data around surfacing and what's safest and the requirements and how deep it has to go according to the equipment that kids are using and how tall it is. It's fascinating and good to know that there is so much data around this and that we're hopefully following it. The other thing that I wanted to ask you, I think I tend to think of slides and monkey bars as the ones that bring me a lot of anxiety because they're associated with injuries. Is there other ones, hopefully not to bring us anxiety, but to have some knowledge of and to be aware of other pieces of equipment that could be dangerous to kids?
Oh, that's a tough question because it's all relative to exposure. And so there have been lots of studies about what equipment kids were on when they got injured, and you can count it up. And yes, it's slides and monkey bars, but those are also the ones the kids use. They love them. They play on them the most. The things that are the safest, the kids don't really play on because they're just not as challenging. There are some that seem to be associated with a fair number of injuries. In my own personal experience, my daughter broke her arm on her school playground because they had a twisty wheel. It was like a monkey bar, but you jumped out and grabbed this wheel thing that would twist, and you could swing yourself to the next one that also twisted. And she jumped out and didn't grab well enough and went down and put one hand down and broke that arm.
Oh, no.
As it fell. So there was a shock absorbing surface, but it wasn't enough. And so she had a small buccal fracture of her arm when she was, eight or nine.
Oh, wow.
And it was fine. A brief cast period, and she healed up fine. And unfortunately, then two other children had the exact same experience, and that playground no longer has a little spinny thing that you jump out and can or cannot catch. So the school was great about monitoring their injuries and reducing the risk. But the things that they replaced it with, they're challenging, but it's not quite the same experience. So that's the pros and cons, is the things that are really challenging and the kids really want to do because they can look, and it hadn't been but just a couple of weeks before that she had me come pick her up. She said, "Mom, I want to show you something." And she showed me that exact move where she jumped out and grabbed this thing that swung. And she was so proud because she's like, "I'd always fallen before and now I can grab it." So she actually had a moment, that she had taken on a challenge and been successful and wanted to show me. It was really wonderful. And it was very sad that then she had a break. Yeah. And then, it happens and it's unfortunate, but I was very proud that she was challenging herself physically because upper body strength is really important, and being able to go across monkey bars and being able to hang upside down on something and being able to spin, having things that spin. These are all things that children need to develop your inner ear and your coordination and your balance and things like that. So that's my own personal experience, but I'm not aware of exact equipment that people should avoid or not avoid, but just the taller it is, obviously, the more challenging it can be, but also if they fall, the more important that the surface is appropriate. And you aren't going to avoid all injuries. We're trying to avoid the brain injuries and hopefully some of the fractures because those are unfortunate. We want to avoid the strangulation because that's life-threatening. So preventing the life-threatening things without hampering a child's development and their fun and their physical activity is the balance we're trying to strike.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's so funny in listening to your own personal story. I think we sometimes forget that being able to use some of this equipment and challenge themselves comes with a lot of pride for our kids, right? So it's definitely a balance. Now, one thing I have noticed is that as we explore different playgrounds in our city, some of the playgrounds were not really a good match developmentally for where my kid was, right? Now he can tackle some of the playgrounds that have more complicated equipment, but it came sort of with time. I just didn't realize at the time that things weren't really matching developmentally. Do you have any tips for parents on how they can be on the lookout for whether the playground they're going to is a good match?
Well, a lot of playgrounds will say what they're age rated to. There'll be a 2 to 5 year old section and then a 5 to 12 or whatever section. That's really helpful if the people who are designing playgrounds will let parents know. Now, granted, there's that overlap of, when the kid is 5-year-old, they're probably not going to want to stay on there. They're ready to challenge themselves, but things may be a little challenging. But the age appropriateness, it's not just age because it's size and developmental level appropriateness. That is really important to consider. And it goes the other way too, because big kids shouldn't be playing on the little kid equipment because it's made for little kids. So they're more likely to crawl on top of the tunnel, which is not safe, rather than going through the tunnel because they're tall enough that they can do it and they want to challenge themselves, but that's not safe. It's not designed for you to cross the tunnel on top of it. You go through it. So it goes both ways. Little kids shouldn't be using the big kid equipment. If that's the only thing that's there, mom, be there to help guide them and help lift them if they need it, things like that. The big kid equipment is too challenging for the really little ones. And also the little equipment is not challenging enough, and the bigger kids will use it inappropriately, will climb on top of things or over things or outside the railing, because the railings aren't intended for kids their height. They're intended for the little ones. So you have to watch and make sure that people are using the equipment that's designed for their physical capability and their challenge level. So that's a really good point that you've noticed with your own child. And it's nice when things are marked, and there's a good reason to consider that and encourage your kid to play on the one that's more appropriate for them than them saying, well, I don't want to be on the little kiddie one, So when your kid is about 5 years old and it's time to start thinking about moving up, then let's start slow, learn the equipment, see what you can do, maybe have me a little closer by to catch and to help and to lift. Going across the monkey bars the first time, maybe mom needs to be there to take some of the body weight so that they can, do it without having to hang themselves. It's a progression. It's like any physical activity, you start at the beginning, and if you can't do it the first time, you just work at it until you can. And it comes with pride and challenge and success and all those things we want our kids to experience. It's really exciting.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as you talked about playgrounds being labeled for age, I don't think I ever really looked at the quote unquote age that the playgrounds around me were labeled for. It was more sort of, moms that texted me, we're going to this and that playground. And so we just sort of met up there. But maybe I could have been a little more proactive in saying, let me research the playgrounds that are safe for my kid and his age, and perhaps saying, oh, how about this one? I've noticed it's a little bit more age appropriate, like something like that. Because honestly, Julie, that would have saved me so much anxiety having to go to a playground that is for older kids and having to watch my kid so closely, right? So another thing I've wondered, again, as I've sort of toured around playgrounds, is that some playgrounds are not really designed for children with disabilities, so I don't see children with disabilities at our local playgrounds. I wonder, Julie, what does an accessible and inclusive playground look like?
It's really tough. The big thing that is easy to spot is, the wheelchair access. So the nice thing about the port in place or fixed kinds of surfacing is that anybody with any type of a walker or canes or a wheelchair, any type of accessibility issues are much easier than on the loose fill like pea gravel or mulch or sand. Unfortunately, for a lot of places, they're very expensive, so it's challenging to do a whole playground that way. So a lot of times you'll end up with these pathways where it goes to get them on the equipment, and then they can crawl or lift themselves through the equipment, which is nice. The downside of when they have the pathways within the mulch up to them is that those are tripping hazards for the kids who are running, as they cross over the path, because they'll have sand and it gets kicked away or whatever. And then that lip of the accessible pathway. And so it's so challenging because you want every child to find something that they can do and challenge themselves with on a playground. But, to make it accessible for people with mobility issues to get to the playground, it really has to be some sort of either a pathway or a port in place entire playground. And the port in place don't allow the equipment to be as high. They're not as safe. The higher the equipment goes, anything over, I think it's about 6 feet. It's not as safe to use the port in place because you can't get the cushion with the depth that it needs to be. So there's again, that risk benefit, trying to figure out how the most kids can be there and challenge themselves the most and have the best equipment, and yet still have a way for the kids who need to have accessibility issues be able to get there and play on that equipment. Also, I think some of the equipment where handholds are, can be different. It's nice when they have bars, the upright where you can grab anywhere along. That means kids of any height or whatever can grab and pull themselves along. The way playgrounds are designed now, they do a really good job of integrating things for everybody. There's sensory things that spin that they can touch with their fingers and have tic-tac-toe boards and things like that. They've got textures now where, even visually impaired children can play and feel different things. The playground designers try to think of everything to challenge the kiddos. So you might notice that there's lots of different levels and textures and things like that for kids of different abilities. Yeah. But it is really challenging to figure out how to balance that.
I mean, it sounds, Julie, like it starts with being intentional, right? With saying this is what we want to do, and we want to be a playground where children of all abilities can come and challenge themselves, as much as the designers themselves might have to challenge themselves. Julie, as we come to the end of the show, we like to end with what we call a parenting prescription. If there's one safety tip every parent should remember about playgrounds, what would it be?
Well, when it comes to playgrounds, I guess the one thing, kids need to have fun. So parents need to relax. So rules are important. The first time you go to a playground, make sure you walk through it with your kiddo, maybe talk about what's safe and what's not safe and how to go down the slide feet first, not head first. Some of those rules, I think it's really important kids get used to rules. And I think the playground can be a good place to reinforce that. And then, try and let your child have fun and try and have fun yourself, like relax.
That goes to me, definitely.
Yeah. People talk about supervision on playgrounds, and there's so many parents that supervise their child while their child gets hurt. You're watching. There's so many parents that are watching as their child falls off. And that's not a bad thing. You want your child to challenge themselves, and sometimes they're going to fall. But then checking, are you at a playground that has good surfacing? I guess that's my one big thing, is that the surfacing should be really shock absorbing, because children are going to fall. They are going to fall. We're going to accept that. That's what's going to happen on a playground. And so helping them have that great experience, and hopefully knowing that a little scrape or two is going to happen, but hopefully nothing more serious than that. So checking your surfacing and relaxing and letting your child have fun while they're obeying the rules. So as a supervisor, the big thing parents should do is call out when they're not obeying your rules, when they're not playing on equipment appropriately, when they're doing things that you can anticipate are going to go badly. So if you're close enough where you can grab them or lift them or help them, or at least verbally, have them stop what they're doing and back up or whatever to keep that bad experience from happening.
Yeah.
So that's where supervision is active. But even if you're watching every minute, you're going to watch your child fall. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if everything else is designed the way it should and surfacing is the way it should be.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And I will definitely take that advice myself. So super, super helpful. Thank you so much, Dr. Julie Gilchrist, for joining us today.
It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
And thank you at home for joining us. If you like the Healthy Children podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and help us spread the word. Follow Healthy Children on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at Healthy Children AAP. And be sure to visit healthychildren.org, the parenting website of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Healthy Children is a production of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Our creative team includes
Laura Alessio,
Catherine Beard,
Gareth Brown,
Zach Christman,
Ann Johnsos, Kathy Jewell,
Claire Keating,
Doug Nagel,
Jackie Ortega,
Susan Stevens Martin,
Mary Claire Walsh,
Hannah Weston.
And our theme music was composed by Doug Nagel. We'll be back next week. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho Sanchez. Thanks for listening.